So when I first started wholesaling, I was covering just the state of Wisconsin, and I stayed in Milwaukee at the same hotel at a very specific schedule, stayed at the same hotel every time I was in Milwaukee, and right around the corner from my hotel was a advisor that I was supposed to be calling on. He would never take my appointment. I one night was running by and noticed that at 7:30 at night his light was on, so I stopped by and just popped in, introduced myself, and left. And then about 2 or 3 months later, in the heart of the 2008 financial crisis, I get a call from my internal, and he says, "Hey, have you met Advisor X before?" And I said, "Yeah, actually, I've stopped in his office. It's right around the corner from my hotel." And he said, "Oh, he talked to me today. He was really upset that he'd never met you." And I was like, "Well, that's funny because he has. So, all right, well, I'll call and set an appointment." So I did. Went in for the appointment next time I was in town about 6 weeks later, and get ushered into his office. And before I have a chance to sit down, he looks up at me and says, "Why have you never been in my office before?" And I was a little bit taken aback about how forward he was. And I said, "Well, actually, I have. If you would remember, one night you were here working late, and I stopped by while I was running and introduced myself." And almost immediately, he broke down in tears and started recounting this long story about how he had started 5 years ago and had been successful and stopped prospecting, and thought that just putting everybody in asset allocation funds was all he needed to do. And now no one would call him back because he hadn't been following up with his clients. And he was really in a tough spot, having family issues. And it's literally the only time I've ever left an office where I called the advisor's manager to tell him something about that meeting. And it was literally because I was worried about that financial advisor. And that anecdote is what we're starting out with today because, as always, we are in the thick of another crisis. And as Philip says, the phrase of the fear-based seller, "This time it's different." And I always repost the last words of the greed-based buyer, "This time it's different." But in this time we are in fear-based selling. My client I was talking to yesterday had someone he was talking down off the ledge who was wanting to sell everything because this time it is different. So with that, we will start out episode 1 of the Valuability Podcast. Chosen or Frozen is today's title. My name is Danforth Fleek. I was a wholesaler, financial advisor, and securities industry worker of many different roles for over 20 years, and I'm joined by my longtime mentor and very good friend, my adopted dad, Philip Simonson. Philip, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Dan. Doing well.
Excellent. Tell the folks a little bit about your background.
Sure. I was started off as an advisor. I'm 62 years around the sun, so I have lived through, and this is, we're in that, as you mentioned, throes of another major crisis. And in this one, I participated in 87. There was ticker tapes that you'd read that day, and that was fearful. And, was an advisor. Then I was a field leader. Set up a company, a financial planning company for American Express over in London, and then came back and did a lot of the leadership and coaching. And Dan, how you and I met, we ran one of the top financial network regions. That was the 4th largest independent. We took it from like number 7 in 2.5 years, brought it up to number 1 with our other partner Nate, and then ended up sitting on the board of ING, the operating committee of ING Advisors Network, and ran all of their business development and practice management for their 8,000 advisors.
Right. Basically the head of all advisor training and development, correct?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, so that kind of fits in directly with our focus for this podcast. Valuability, we're really focusing in on financial advisors primarily, but also business owners and anybody interested in the financial planning process, business, leadership development and personal development. So, financial advisors certainly going to be a large part of our audience, but also anyone interested in the financial planning process as well. We're going to be able to find this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify. We are going to upload it to our YouTube channel as well. And then, of course, at value-ability.com. Click on the episodes tab and you'll be able to find all of our episodes there. And of course, wherever we have to do the universal mantra of like, review, subscribe, and share. Wherever you find us, please give us feedback and thumbs up and all of that good stuff. So we're also going to have a mailing list on the Valuability website, so value-ability.com, and click on Contact Us, or you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at value_ability. So with that, Philip, let's jump into the main topic for this week, chosen or frozen, kind of your... so this was originally made for the 2008 crisis, correct? After
Correct.
the
That's
original,
right.
because the title of it is, volatility in a post 9/11 world. So, looking back at 9/11, what things could you learn from that crisis? And of course, it's the same things you can learn from every crisis. And so now we're at the next crisis, looking back at the 2008 crisis. So why don't you share with us a little bit what's in that?
Sure.
What's in that piece?
I will, and let me just bolt on to what you were your story earlier. And I'm glad good job on your part calling as field leader. For most advisors and independent advisors, it's a lonely island out there, and particularly during these times of crisis, fear gets embedded in everyone, and fear by itself and left alone it'll immobilize a lot of people. So, and also, fear stands for that false evidence appearing real acronym, and Merrill Lynch said, okay, what can we learn from the 9/11 incident? And they did a survey. And the survey that they conducted, it wasn't just with their clients, but they, it could have been some of UBS's, but they did 1,952 mailings to retail investors who had 100,000 to 1 million. Then they did 417 to what we'd call the affluent investor, over $1 million plus, Dan. So there's 2,369 total surveyed. Of what they found, they asked them how many of you received a call from your advisor following 9/11? 2 weeks after. What do you think, Dan? What percentage do you think were called?
I mean, I'd hope that it's higher, but I'm gonna guess that it's 20%.
Yeah, you got it. It's actually right around there. You could say 1 in 5. Actually, it was like 78.98%. Did not receive a call. So
yeah, it's super interesting. I was starting out wholesaling during that time. I started my first wholesaling position in the summer of 2007. So I was like right in the thick of that. And honestly, the advisors that did really well during that time frame were the new advisors, because they had to call people. And resoundingly, the feedback I remember was, this is great. I'm calling people left and right and picking up assets left and right because nobody's calling their clients. And it's a pretty easy sell. I'm here. I'll help you.
Well, you bring up 2 points there. One, you reinforce fear immobilizes people. So that just like deer in headlights are just frozen. 2, usually in times of crisis, that's when leadership is revealed. In times of prosperity, it's concealed. So piggybacking on to what you said there for these new advisors, they went a little bit further, and they asked them, they said, okay, to these 2,400 people that they surveyed, all right, what do you want to talk about? And the responses were, first and foremost, 93.5% just wanted to talk about how am I doing emotionally. Then the next thing, 86.6%. And 9/11, very similar to the virus today. It's a headline event. It's
Right.
not, an economic event. Although we do have three things going on as the three whammies, and that is it's the virus, and then of course now you do have a financial crisis, and we're having the Fed step in, and then of course the oil, and so, but they just wanted to know, hey, how my families are reacting. And then they 40.9%, 40, let's say 41% wanted to know what should the government do. And then 8.1% short term, they wanted to talk about the stock market. What should I be doing? Long term, what should I be doing?
Right. So only less than 10% actually wanted to talk directly about their investments.
Yeah.
And that's a key thing that it's hard for a lot of advisors to remember, is that at the same time that, we deal with investments all day, every day. It's what we do. But for most people, they're dealing with other stresses. So in this current environment, people are thinking about, what does this mean for my job? I was talking to my friend out in Seattle the other day, who the company decided, hey, you know what? Everybody work from home. And then the first day everybody worked from home, they said, you know what? Now we changed our mind. Everybody's fired. And it just closed the whole office. Now, there were some tendencies that it was going that way anyway.
Right.
But that's the kind of thing that people are more focused on, right? We're so in our own heads all the time about, it's about the stock market, it's about the stock market, it's about the stock market. And from the inbound calls, I'm sure that it is, right? So those are the clients that are so motivated, fear around their investments, that they are calling you. So it also gives that false impression that everybody is feeling that way, where most people are worried about their job. In this case, they're worried about their mom, their dad, the elderly people in their family that might get it, the kids in their family that might get it. So this, like I said, people are focused on other things, and the survey bears that out. It's more than just the financial side.
Absolutely, and as human beings, we're hardwired to respond emotionally first. So I'm, and no surprise to me that it's emotions. After 9/11, I started studying behavioral advice, etc. Now, going back, connecting the dot to the young advisors that were starting off in the last crisis, is when you first started wholesaling. They said, all right, next question. How many of you will be investing over the next 12 months? And the retail investor, that's the 100 to million, 74.2% said, yes, I would. The affluent was 78.8%, said they would, million plus. Then next question is, how many of you will be investing with the advisor who did not contact them?
There you go.
What do you think that was, Dan?
I'd say at least 50.
Yeah. It would be not, 50 would be a nice number. It was less than 1% would invest with the advisor who did not call them up.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I thought you meant how many people would invest with a different advisor.
Oh,
so
yeah,
so 99%, well over my 50%.
Well over. So those new advisors starting off, they were cherry picking.
Absolutely. And in fact, once I got to 2011, 2012, I had lots of advisors saying, gee, I wish the crisis were still around. It was way easier to get clients back then. So it's also always a matter of perspective, right? Because certainly I did not hear that from the more established advisors. Now, most of my clients at that point were newer, because that's where you build your client base initially as a product wholesaler. But I did have some, big established advisors as clients, and honestly, most of them were sitting with their head in their hands and in shock, and you'd go into their office and it was more like a therapy session. than anything else is in that role as a wholesaler. You didn't have there weren't many people that those advisors could turn to
No,
at that
little
time.
lonely island, like we said earlier.
Yeah,
Exactly.
people at home didn't want to hear it. Clients didn't want to hear it. So we were kind of the ear.
Yeah. Well, it's the first time in my best man in my wedding. He manages, our money. And Bill, very first time I got a call from him, he was shook up.
Yeah.
And he does, I'm just, let's just say he does very, very well. More than a couple commas. And everyone needs to vent with someone.
Right.
And so the $64,000 question then in the room, or the elephant in the room, is, what do I do about this? Well, first, let me just say, how do you eat an elephant? Well, of course, that's one bite at a time. So if I was looking at what I got to, take action on, and in the face of fear, the opposite is courage, and courage is one of the, as Winston Churchill said, of all the virtues, courage is number one, because without it, you aren't moving, you aren't going forward. In essence, what he was saying. I would break it down, and many of them, maybe as you said, the veterans, advisors out there might have already done this, but if not, do your Pareto's law. The gentleman Pareto, Italian, who won the Nobel Prize in economics in 1918, 1916, somewhere around in there. But what he found out was, 20% of your clients are going to produce 80% of your results. Whoever those 20% are, identify them. Be out there being proactive, reaching out and calling. Then I would do the next 30%. So you at least are contacting your top 50%. Right. Of your clients immediately within the first 2 weeks. Then we'll share this with people later too. But now what you've got is press that pause for cause button, and that pause for cause button, this is to get yourself in the right frame of mind and get that self-talk that's which occurs 6 inches between the ears. You gotta position yourself. Take 3 deep breaths, and center yourself and reduce your stress level. But pull up what we're going to call the pause for cause, because what you don't want to do, particularly during the crisis of fear, you want to identify your fear, and you want to let your clients know it's okay to have that emotion, fear. But what is not okay is to act on that fear. So make them, press the pause for cause button, and then what we call use the 4 R's. I learned this technique from Doug Lennox, my mentor, who is set up a consulting firm, Think to Perform. Some of you want to look at this further. But the 4 R's, and the first one is just recognize, like we just kicked off. They want to just talk about how they're feeling. So, one of the questions you could just use is, how are you feeling? Or what are you feeling? And once you get that out, they finally get the vent, like you were saying, Dan, that little lonely island you had to listen to, to the advisors when you were wholesaling during this time period, so they could vent and so they could then move on. But then, what are you thinking? So first and foremost, touch the heart, not the brain here.
Right.
We're all hardwired to talk about facts and the mountain charts and yada, yada, yada. That's not what they want at this time. So the first R is just recognize their feelings.
Yeah, the other part of that as well too, and everybody has a tendency to do this, is you're not then firing at a target that the client doesn't care about, right? My example of this is it wasn't a big crisis, but it was during the .com burst prior to 9/11. Mm-hmm. My biggest client, he was down 10%, and it was a big account for me. So about $1 million account, but at that age, I was 27, 28. I was like, oh, I lost this guy $100,000, and I was just sweating and couldn't, I was sick to my stomach. And I go over to do the review with him at his office on a Saturday, and literally when I told him how he had performed, he was like, "That's awesome. My neighbor's down 20%. next. And, so, and a lot of advisors have in their mind to, hey, I've got this thing from my broker dealer that says these are the talking points, and I call and bam, I'm right into it. Cause we're used to scripts and we're used to getting that message out there. No, ask them what they're feeling. They might be fine. No, I'm not worried. Next, how am I doing? Okay, it's down. All right, well, do I need to do anything? Nope. Okay. And so you don't need to waste time going through your whole spiel if they don't have a problem, right? And secondly, then you're focusing it on them immediately and letting them, like you said, vent if they are having problems.
Touch that heart.
Get some of that right out there. Yep.
Yeah. And have that empathy. And and once you get that, then you can go to the second R. And then just have your goals changed. When last time we checked, this money was earmarked for retirement. Well, that's still 8 years away, 10 years away. So find out, revisit the goals, reflect, then reframe it from a big picture, and then respond. And we've got this, Dan will post this, but these 4 R's and the questions you can ask, and if it makes good sense to you, then feel free to use them.
Yes, we'll go ahead and put that up on the valuability.com website under episodes. So under each episode, we will post the documents that we talk about. And so underneath this section for episode 1, Chosen or Frozen, we will post the Chosen or Frozen document for you guys to use. And as always on that side, free of charge.
Yep. And Dan, you add one other, I'm going to bolt on or add on here. The other key thing here are the what questions versus the why questions. Use what questions. What questions makes a person go internal? And when you go internal, that's when you're given the opportunity for the other person in front of you or whoever you're talking to gain their own insight or aha moment.
Right.
And that's where long-term behavior starts and where change can occur.
No, that's really interesting. I'm obviously you get taught to be big on open-ended questions, but that's the quality of open-ended question also is a big deal, and the why immediately then puts people outside to the influences that are causing them to feel that way, as opposed to just simply reflecting on what that feeling is. So that's an awesome point.
Yeah. Once in a while I'll have some of those, but they're once in a while.
So summary of main points. How would you summarize this before we move on to our article for the day?
Look, it's okay. You're fearful. They're fearful. During this time period, when there is a crisis, that crisis equals opportunity. Your opportunity is to deliver on your value proposition, and that is calling them up. Give them, I would say practice the acronym BEST. You've got to have belief in the long-term strategies that you put together. Probably not going to change. Revisit the diversification. Revisit, maybe we can reposition some of the assets. Take advantage of dividend plays right now if it's appropriate. But then, if that acronym, the next is E out of the BEST, empathize with them, your clients, and then support them in how they're feeling and support the long-term strategy that you laid out to achieve their goals. And I truly believe then they will... you will strengthen the trust that they have in you. And I practice that principle best.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that I would put in there on my side of this dynamic duo, I focus on, kind of the technology and the process of financial advising. If you don't have a crisis process, you need to build one. Like, you shouldn't be making this up right now. You should always have a process in place. and have it ready to go. Be able to go into your contact management system, pull that list, and sit down and just start dialing when it hits. When the stock market freezes because the automatic triggers have frozen. Yeah, that's a time to get that crisis process out and just dig in and go through it. And like anything, you will get better and better at mastering that process.
Yeah, Dan, I do want to. I love that you bring that technology, because one piece that we did ignore here is the bottom 50%. Well, I don't mean for you as an advisor to ignore them, but what Dan just said, boy, they should be getting an email. And I think we'll have embedded in here where they can find one of the emails we put together for some as well. So
sure, perfect, awesome. Well, let's transition on to our article for today. And each week we're gonna pull an article out of the financial world and talk about it. And this week I picked one that you will learn this quickly. The articles I pick are usually because it raises my ire in some way, and that's actually one of the things that Philip and I, as we were talking about this project, is kind of the idea behind it is, when you're licensed, you can't really talk about public articles. You can't really make comments on it. And now that I have not licensed with anyone, I am ready and raring to let my opinions be known. So this article is called Why Some Retirement Advisors Don't Add Value. We will post a link to it on our Twitter feed and that Twitter handle is @value_ability. And then I'll also post a link to it, of course, on the Value Ability website, value-ability.com, under the episodes tab right next to all the other documents. So again, it's called Why Some Retirement Advisors Don't Add Value. I'm just going to read a couple of excerpts here, and then Philip and I are going to give our opinions on it really quickly. The conventional wisdom is that investors without advisors often make the wrong choices. They don't save enough. They botch their retirement planning. People with advisors do better. But that's not always true. Some advisors, specifically plan advisors, are not helping but hurting investors when it comes to achieving goals, as many people fall behind in their retirement savings. A new study finds that the defined contribution recommendations of some retirement plan advisors are actually generating inferior returns that lag benchmarks. Okay, great. So let's just start there. All of this intro is awesome. Like, yep, you're right. Conventional wisdom is that advisors help people from making wrong choices. They don't save enough. They botch their plans. They don't have goals. And then it switches to returns. What does that have to do with goals? Like, besides the fact that returns are what gets you to your goals, the returns are not your goals. No one walks into your office. Well, that's not true. Some people walk into your office and say, I want 25% return. But that's not a goal. That's a function of a goal. And it frustrates me to no end that as advisors, we are constantly trying to teach our clients that, hey, look, returns aren't the end all be all. I said this to my clients, whether they were my advice clients when I was a financial advisor, or if I was working with an advisor and working with their clients. I'd say, look, I don't care what percentage you get. I want to get you to your goal. If I need 9% to get you to your goal, great. I'll get that. If I need 5% to get you to your goal, that's what I'm going to do. Like, I don't care what return you get. I want you to get to your goal. And articles like this just drive me out of my mind, because they take one thing that we're trying to spearhead in the advice industry and then immediately throw it under the bus by focusing on what every single individual investor focuses back on, is just percentage return. So at that, I'll stop that portion of my rant and toss it over to you, Philip.
Well, I don't disagree with anything you said there. My thoughts when I read it is, just first things first. If they've got a good advisor, you focus in, just as you said, the goal, and really looking at the goal here, this is qualified money. It's there for retirement, I would suggest. And then, so what are their wants, and when are they going to retire? How much are they going to specifically need? And if you got a good advisor, they'll backwards plan into that by doing the planning and figure out, okay, overall, here's, based your rate, here's what you're going to need for your rate of return to achieve this goal and never run out of money. And also, we're going to, they're going to take a look at the doing, what's their risk tolerance and asset allocation. So the other flip side of that, if it's a good advisor too, and you're focused on returns, and that shouldn't be the case, as you said, because most of my clients, or most clients advisors I've worked with, they're more concerned whether or not they achieved the goal versus whether or not they came in first, second, or third year upon year.
Absolutely.
Right. And I also would suggest that if it also is return, it's an educational piece here. Wait a minute. If you're doing the asset allocation, you're diversifying. Well, then most of these people and the investors in the 401ks, if they're can't compare against the Dow Jones, can't compare against the S&P 500, because you've got many different asset classes.
Right.
But I would recommend that what the advisor should do here, and a good advisor or plan advisor, take a look at what type of product selection they actually have in that plan. Then look at the total costs. Those internal expenses are crucial. And I would look at the expense ratio, and that's the 12B1s, which they cover the marketing and distribution costs. Forbes did a great article on this a while back. And the ongoing costs can be identified in reading, you can do it in reading the prospectus. But the average domestic, if they're using these mutual funds in there, is 0.84%. Then there's the transaction costs. A lot of people, you got to look deep for this stuff, but it's buying and selling of the shares each and every day that portfolio manager is doing. There's going to be a cost on that, and that transaction cost comes out to about 1.44%.
Right.
Then if it's a mutual fund that they're offering, I'm not going to get into what type of class, etc. But you do have to keep so much in cash because for redemption purposes, if there's a run on this thing. So then what's called a cash drag, and the cash drag comes up to about 0.83%. So, and I'm not, so you're looking anywhere, I said 0.84, 1.44, and 0.83. We're at, close to a little over 3% just in internal expenses.
Right.
So a good advisor, and I'll just turn it over to you, but a good advisor then might just recommend, what, if this is our only selection here, maybe why don't we just run this thing up to the contribution amount, then take a look at traditional or, Roth, and then go back in, but don't waste the contribution amount of the employer here. With that, I'm complete.
Yeah, and that really speaks to, I think, the overall, the two things I'll use to wrap up this section is that retirement plan is just a piece, right? And your advisor should be taking tactical and strategic steps, like you're saying, to look at the plan, figure out what is available in it and how it should be best utilized. And in fact, one of our questions for the day will kind of touch on this as well. But you really need to be looking at that larger strategic plan. That's what, I thought this article, when I first clicked on it, was going to go down that road and kind of, also talk about the second topic that I think is something to bring up, which we can talk about in a later episode, which is the structure of the industry right now is such that it makes it a challenge to work with retirement plans as a financial advisor, right? In that you don't have any control over your client's retirement plan in any meaningful way. So, bigger picture question, and we will talk about this down the line, which is, what does it mean to be a fiduciary? All of that kind of thing in the background of that question. But the reality of it is that most advisors, whether they are, technically fiduciaries or not, the ones that I've worked with at least, have always acted under that assumption. almost every advisor I've ever worked with practices the golden rule.
Right.
And whether they are a fiduciary or not, they are working in their client's best interest. So, but with that, we'll wrap up the article section. Again, we will post that on our Twitter feed, a link to that, as well as posting it on the website if you want to take a look at that in its original format. So now we're on to our question section. We're going to take 2 questions each week. If you have a question and you want to send it to us, or if you have a topic that you'd like us to cover in an episode, again, use our Twitter account. You can tweet it at us at value_ability, or on the value-ability.com website. Click on Contact Us, and there is a form there you can submit questions and topics to us. So this week, we'll start out with the first question. Number 1, is a 401k only worth it if it offers an employer match? Philip, I'll let you start out with that one.
I think I could say I covered it earlier on, and I'll let you bolt onto that one.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, no. That's the bottom line is no.
I thought 401k you might come that way.
is a very, very, very useful tool. Certainly, the employer match is number 1, right? That is money you earned, right? Like, too many people think about the employer match as something the employer is giving you, or no, that's money you earned. You just have to get it by contributing to your plan. Like, so that's part of your compensation is that match.
Total economic package. It is part of
absolutely.
it. You are right. And boy, if they match me $1 for $1 up to 3% or something, that's a hell of a rate of return. Excuse my language on that, but I'm not going to leave that money on the table. That's free money. I earned it, but it's still free money.
Talking about return, it's 100% return, if you want to think about it that way.
That's the way I always looked at it.
So, yes, obviously up to the match. You know, when we're thinking about the ways in which you utilize investments, typically you look at, different investment accounts. You look at doing your 401k up to the match, then switching to either your IRA or your Roth IRA up to the max for that, simply because it's under your control. You don't have to roll it over. You typically have more choices over there, and then switch back to your 401k, because the big advantage besides the match is the amount you can put into it. The amount you can put into a retirement plan is way in excess of what you can save in an IRA. So that is what is the really, really, really big positive to the 401k or retirement plan, is the amount of money that you can either get in a tax deductible, tax deferred state, or if it's a Roth, in a tax-free state.
Yeah.
So
you always got to take a look at what's your tax savings by doing this, as well as those internal fees I mentioned earlier.
Absolutely. So second question, and this is question is right up Philip's alley. And I knew it when I put it on our list for today. What is the most effective piece of financial advice you have ever received? And for me, this one is easy. And it did, in fact, come from Philip. When I first started, my first real job was working, as Philip mentioned earlier, with a financial network office. And I was kind of the handyman. I did a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of everything, compliance, operations, relationship management. And on the side, Philip would take me out to Dairy Queen on Wednesdays and give me a little individual personal coaching, doing a process called What Do You Want for Yourself, kind of a personal development, and we'll talk about that at some point in a future episode. And he taught me, hey, look, you need to pay yourself first. And within my family, I'd gotten a lot of good financial advice. My dad was pretty good about teaching me how to use a checkbook and pay bills and remain financially focused, but he didn't really teach me anything about investing. And so Philip was really the first person to say, hey, look, you got to make your investing, your saving, essentially a bill. something that is
Right.
not negotiable. It's right next to your mortgage, and it's right next to your food, it's right next to your insurance. It is an essential. It is not something that you can leave to the end of the month and quote unquote, invest whatever's left. So we have an entire episode on the pay yourself first. So I'll stop there and toss it over to Philip. But that is absolutely the best advice I've ever received financially.
And I am going to reiterate it. The secret to accumulating wealth is this: a part of all I earn is mine to keep. Those 10 simple words, but they're simple and they're often neglected. Now I just want to turn it into a simple formula. And I had, Dan, I think it was The Richest Man in Babylon is where I got it. And it's the 70-20-10 rule. If you made 100,000, 70% of that is 70,000. That's what you live on. 20% is then of that 100,000. That's what you're going to, that's for savings. Maybe for got a down payment on a house, or the next purchase of the car, or the vacations, etc. And the last 10%, that's your investing. So 70-20-10, and you put yourself first in that payroll line. And the formula for financial independence, it hasn't changed from Ben Franklin's time. The first big thing is time plus money plus American and foreign free enterprise. That equals the opportunity to becoming financially wealthy or independent. You will become independent. And that's where work is optional and retirement's affordable.
Excellent. So with that wraps up our first episode. Again, I just want to reiterate, if you have questions or topics that you'd like us to cover, hit us up on our Twitter account at value_ability, or go to the Value Ability webpage, value-ability.com. Click on Contact Us and use the form to submit your question or topic. And on that page as well is our mailing list. If you want to get updates of new episodes and different news and mailers, sign up for our mailing list. Wherever you find us, like, review, subscribe, share, please, always. And thank you so much for listening. I want to say thanks to Philip for this excellent first episode. I think it went beyond my expectations. We're starting to get a little bit of mastery here, so thanks so much.
Thank you, Dan. You are the master.
And with that, I will say thanks so much again, and join us next week. And remember that your financial success comes from building a plan on the foundation of your values, and building your ability will help you get there. This is a podcast collaboration, not a peer-reviewed journal or a sponsored publication. We make no representations as to accuracy, completeness, correctness, suitability, or validity of any information in this podcast, and will not be liable for any errors, omissions, or delays in this information, or any losses, injuries, or damages arising from its display or use. All information is provided on an as-is basis. It is the listener's responsibility to verify their own facts. You should be aware of the real risk of loss in following any strategy or investment discussed on this podcast. Strategies or investments discussed may fluctuate in price or value. Investors may get back less than invested. Investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you. This material does not take into account your particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs, and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for you. You must make an independent decision regarding investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast. Before acting on information on this podcast, you should consider whether it is suitable for your particular circumstances, and strongly consider seeking advice from your own financial or investment advisor. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company. Assumptions are not reflective of the position of any entity other than the authors, and since we are critically thinking human beings, these views are always subject to change, revision, and rethinking at any time. Please do not hold us to them in perpetuity.